första gången blir skitbra. Nej, det är samma.
Nu ska vi se, jag ska släcka. Så. Okay. Let's see if we also. Right. How is it going with assignments? You're working on the last assignment, I guess? Yeah. And you have this virtual machine now that we haven't used before. Is that working for you? Okay. Good. So, the idea for today is then to just check in for the exam where you are, if you have any questions, and see if we can straighten out some things here. As you also probably seen, I added now these two exams from last year. But if you have any questions on any of the exams, or if you have any other questions, we can look at that. That's the idea for today. The exam is on Tuesday, right? And hopefully you signed up. If you didn't sign up, you know there is still this option to just go and write the exam 45 minutes after. If there are seats available, you can start the exam at that time. That rule has been changed back and forth a few times, but as far as I know, that's the rule right now. And for use on distance, I will send out the home exam at the same time as the exam starts here, and then I will contact you. But I will get back to you. So, are there any questions to start with? Either general or some specific question? Well, let's look at the first exam from last year then. As you see, in total there are 7 questions. There will be probably 7 or 8 questions, and as you see, they try to cover different parts. Each exam couldn't cover every chapter of the book, but I try to distribute them rather evenly. If you're going through all the different exams, you see that some questions are coming back or in a little bit different variations, or some topics that are more central that I come back to more often, but there's nothing that come back every time. And well, the first one then, coming from the first chapter about the general things about security. So if you take one, first one, A here, security threats can be handled by looking at objects that you have for the security. Should be one model, okay? One model is this CIA model, describe this model. So what does the CIA stand for, if you start with that? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Yeah, that's something that sometimes you can think, is it availability or is it authentication perhaps, or authorization? I mean, there are quite a lot of different terms here, but it's availability. And typically we write the model using this diagram then. To point that these are overlapping goals. And for some systems it's only confidentiality, for some it's only integrity, and some availability, but for some systems we have requirements on all of these goals. And just to answer the questions fully, you should write a sentence or two about each. Confidentiality about having information kept from everyone. It's only available. It should only be available for ones that really need it. Integrity is about that information is correct. Shouldn't be able to be changed unless you have a requirements for it. And availability, that information is available when the policy is that it should be available, which doesn't mean that it should be available always. We could have a policy that we should only have this information available once a month during a one-time window. As long as that is reached, then it's okay. So that's important. Okay, so that's the first one. And then we have described the difference between an attack and a security threat targeting network security. So what is a threat and what is an attack? Which one is most problematic? Yeah, the attack. Because an attack is something that is actually going on. Someone, yeah? Exactly. A threat is the potential for an attack. There is some vulnerability in the system. That vulnerability can be used in some way. We have found there is a threat because there is a potential to use that vulnerability in an attack. So then that's a threat. And when someone is actually doing it, it's an attack. And it's not really, doesn't matter if it's network security or other types of security. It's the same terminology. It's just that the type of threats, the type of attacks are of course different here. And then we talk about active and passive threats. What's the difference between them and how difficult is it to protect against them? So what's an active threat? What is a passive threat? Yeah, sorry. Well, if we go back to the figure we talk about, which goes back to the standard, yeah, they talk about 4, but these are quite general types. I mean, if you go into the details, you can find that there are more. But these are 4 typical cases, that's right, for active. So what are they? What is an active attack in general? Modification is one type of active attack, but what is the thing that is different between active and passive? Well, yeah, it's hard to know about passive threats than yeah, passive threats than active threats. And why is it hard to see that we have exactly? If we have a passive threat or a passive attack, we don't see any change in what was actually intended to be sent and what we actually see. The network is showing exactly the same thing that we are intending to see and think that we'll see. While in an active threat, there is a difference here between what we intend to have on the network and what we actually see on the network.
In the network traffic?
Yeah, on the yeah, exactly, because we are looking at what goes on the network. And the network can either be, I mean, it can just be the last little part of a transmission that is changed just between the last switch and your host, or it can be somewhere on the internet, somewhere along the transmission line there is a change. And that is why passive threats are hard to notice, because it's not obvious how we can see that we have a passive threat. We know what we should have, and we can see that is what we have. It's not impossible to detect them, but it's very hard. So a typical passive attack is just someone listening into your network and gaining information about what's going on. It's not impossible to see that someone is listening, but it's very hard. Exactly, it's much easier to prevent, and that's the second part here. Passive threats are relatively easy to protect against, because they don't harm anything, they don't change anything, so as long as you package things in a way that makes it useless for an attacker, it's relatively easy to protect. By an active threat can be much harder. Let's see, I have a question here on the chat. Well, how extensive do the answers need to be? And it's a little bit hard to say, but in general what you should look at is how many points you get. So if you only get, say, 2 points for a question, that typically means that you only need a few sentences, or maybe even a few words in some cases. If I ask for, if you want to have 4 or 6 credits, you have to write more. It can be half a page, something like that. I would say that in most cases half a page works. There are some questions that need you to show how you're doing things. And then it takes more space because you need to show a number of steps in order to reach a solution. Like the decryption, you have to show what you're doing in a certain steps, and then it may take several pages. So yeah, but in general, half a page where you write a number of sentences describing something should be enough for each sub-question here. Okay, is there anything else around this first question? Something related to that?
Can you answer how difficult it is to protect against?
Yeah, we said that passive threats is much easier to protect against.
Okay, so you don't have to explain why? Or
Well, no, you don't have to go into that. There is enough in that question already, so yeah, it's enough to say, come to that conclusion. Okay. Then we have a question related to encryption then. Describe briefly, which means that you don't have to write pages, but a paragraph at least, why the key length is important and what is generally seen as required key length for symmetrical and asymmetrical. So there are a few things that we need to answer here. And that is a general thing that you should make sure that there are typically several things that you need to answer. I mean, here in this question, you need to talk about first why it's important, and then you have to answer the length for both asymmetric and symmetric. So there are at least 3 different things that you need to describe here. So the first part, why is the key length important?
Brute force attacks.
Yeah, a brute connected to a brute force. If we assume that we are using a strong encryption algorithm, and if we're using a strong encryption algorithm, there are no backdoors, no hidden things that makes it possible to decrypt the information. And if that is the case, the only way to actually decrypt it is having the key. Of course, you can get the key in different ways. Could be a social engineering attack, you can listen in on the network, whatever, to get the key. If you do then the length doesn't really matter. But in most cases you don't have access to the key, and then it's a brute force attack, which is the only option. And for a brute force attack, it's directly related to the key length, how probable that one is to succeed. So that's why the key length is important. And then what is generally seen as required key length for symmetrical and asymmetric. So we talk about symmetrical first, which is the most common symmetrical encryption algorithm used today. The standard algorithm used for symmetrical encryption. I think I heard it. So, oh yes, yeah. Advanced encryption standard. And how long is the key for OIS?
128.
It's actually, you have an option. So it can be 168, 256 as well. But OS is considered to be secure. So around that, around 100, 200 bits. And if you look at other symmetrical encryption algorithms we have, it's the same. If we go somewhere between 100 and 200 bits, we are on the secure side today. We don't need to be more specific of that because, I mean, it changes all the time and it's different for different algorithms. So if we are just in that range, it's okay. For asymmetrical then, what are the typical asymmetrical? 2000, yeah. 2000, 4000, maybe even up to 8000, but 2,000 to 4,000 is typically considered to be secure today. So it's more than 10 times. And that also reflects on encryption time. We know that symmetrical encryption is much slower, partly because we have this longer key, but also because of the mechanism inside. Okay, then we have this question. What are the 2 criteria required for an encryption scheme to be considered to be secure? The 2 main criteria. We can break it down to different sub-goals as well, but if we just take the main ones.
The time to decrypt the information is more than the information is valid.
Now we get actually down to the details. Exactly as say, the time to decrypt the information is longer than the lifetime of the information, or another sub-goal on the same level, that the cost that you put into it to decrypt it or hack it is higher than the value of the information. But these are sub-goals, actually, or more detailed way to describe. So we have to lift it one level up to talk about the two criteria. Well, if you just think free, it's not that complicated actually.
Algorithm?
Yeah, the algorithm need to be secure, exactly. The algorithm need to be secure. Couldn't be any loopholes in the algorithm. It couldn't be any problems with it. So the algorithm itself need to be a secure algorithm. That's the first criteria. And the second one, well, what do we always need? A key, exactly. And what property of the key? Well, not the length, because we assume that already. Yes, not random. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's something around the key. But what is one of the major problems with keys? Shared, yeah, exactly. The key distribution. So we need to have a secure key distribution. Otherwise, it doesn't matter that we have a secure algorithm. So we need a secure algorithm and we need a secure key distribution. If we have that, then we assume that the encryption scheme is secure. And as you know, we can solve the key distribution different ways depending if it's asymmetric or symmetric, but we need to handle it some way. Okay, the next one I will actually not do here, but we can discuss it a little bit. We start out here with this text saying that the following text is an encrypted message. You suspect it's encrypted with a simple substitution cipher. Okay, if we stop there, what does that tell us?
It replaces a letter with another letter.
Yeah, it tells us that each letter here is replaced somehow or have been replaced. So we should be able to decrypt it by taking letter by letter, and an A, for instance, should always be replaced with something else. It's the same. Could be a K or an F or whatever, but we substitute them one letter at a time. So that's vital information, and we need to know what type of encryption it is in order to know how to attack it. And then if you go down, we have the text. Is it anything obvious here that you can see that makes it easier to decrypt this text? Yeah?
Spaces and punctuation.
Yeah, exactly. The spaces and punctuation, they are not encrypted, obviously.
And a lot of the same words.
And a lot of the same words as well, yeah. So we immediately see patterns here. So this is a very weak encryption. I mean, what we should have done is maybe removed all the blanks and the punctuations, or we should have encrypted them as well. Because now we can see that the first word is a word with 2 characters, and then we have a longer word, and we have sentences. So we can, yeah, we immediately see the structure of a message here. So that can help us quite a lot. And then if we go down further down, we have this one. We have a frequency table for the English language. How will that help us?
You know what English letters are mostly used when typing.
So which one is mostly used? E, exactly. So how do we now use this information that E is the most common one? How will that help us to decrypt this text? We count all the letters, yeah. How many times they occur. Which of course takes some time. But we will make a table, and then we just go through the characters and put crosses for each occurrence of them, and it doesn't take that many minutes to go through this text, and then we'll see the relative how many times each character appears. And then we can see that the one that occurs mostly is probably an E. It's not for sure because, I mean, texts are different. Sometimes it could be maybe the second one, the T, which is most common. But if a text is big enough, it should be relatively often that we actually get an E. So that's how we can break it down. We take the most common one, we try to replace them, and then after that we can actually start guessing, probably. Because now we can start to see that words that are 2 characters long, there are not too many words with just 2 characters, and if we know one of them, then we can probably guess the other one, and then we can start to guess one word at a time, and then we can fill in the blanks, how we substitute and test that for the rest of the text. And if we do that, it doesn't take very long actually to decrypt this text.
You can already see like the one-letter words, some might be an A, and then there are also words that start with an A.
Exactly. This could be an A or it could be an I.
Yes, but there are also words that P, F, or P.
AF, AR.
P. But I would guess that P is an A because there are quite a few of them. And yeah,
Figure out the N.
this could be an, couldn't be an, if this is an A, this couldn't be an N, but it could be if, or, yeah. So you play around with it a little bit, and then you should, what you need to do is you have to describe your steps, what you did. If you did actually use a frequency analysis, or if you just started guessing and then filling in your blanks and you seeing what worked and so on. But that's how you need to do it. So first describe that you know it's a substitution cipher, it has these properties, and now what you did. So it's not enough just to give the decrypted sentence. You have to describe what you do as well.
But if you get an encryption question like this on the exam, it won't be any PIN ciphers or RSA.
No. No. Those are too, it's too much mathematics to do those. So it would be something simple then.
What is the first sentence? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I don't remember actually.
About cryptography.
Yeah, I think it's something about encryption.
Cryptography.
Maybe that is an answer for
You already decrypted part of it.
I'm just guessing most of the texts are about cryptography.
Yeah.
I guess 'cause
If I remember correctly, it's from the wiki page about encryption. So the first paragraph about encryption on the wiki.
I mean, if you guess the second word is cryptography, you basically solved it already.
Yeah. Exactly. Mm.
You have a lot of letters.
I mean, if it's long
Yes.
letter words, then it's easier for me at least to guess to what it can be.
Like a
So
game show.
Mm. Well, that's your home work to figure it out. Okay. So, transport layer security. SSL TLS can be found on transport level. Why is SSL TLS on the transport level? Well, in order to have a chance to answer that, we need to think about what is the purpose of TLS SSL. What's the intended purpose? Because that gives us the answer why we should put it on in the TCP/IP stack. So what is the purpose?
Provide security for the transporter.
Provide security for,
Application.
yeah, the
Communication.
question is exactly what is it? Because if we say that, I mean, if we say that to get protection on the transport level, that's not really a reason for why we put it. It's obvious. So we need to find something else. And then you say, okay, an application to give the communication of an application.
Host to host.
A security host to host, okay. But if we talk about host to host, we could put it on network layer. If you talk about communication between two applications, we could put it on the application layer as well, right? So what is specific for SSLTS that makes us put it on the transport layer just between those two?
Is it because we want to be able to encapsulate the application packet
Yeah,
with security
yeah.
to be able to send it over the network?
You don't want to implement security transportation for every application. You just put it under, and it can be applied for every application.
Yeah.
independently.
That's the key part here. We want to be able to get security for applications, but we don't want to make it application specific. So we actually have to implement it on each application. We want to give a general service for an application that can get communication between two applications secure. And but we want to have it specific. We don't want to put it on a network layer because then it's general for everyone. We want each application to decide how to protect itself. So then the transport level is the perfect layer because now any application can use it, but it will only protect the traffic of that application. So each application have to decide if and how to use it. Okay, then we have HTTP strict transport security. Protocol used together with HTTPS. So if we first talk about HTTPS, what is that? What is HTTPS? Well, if we remove S, what is then? Yep. Hypertext Transfer Protocol, the secure version of it, which is actually using then SSL TLS to get security. So HTTPS is really just a combination of HTTP wrapped in SSL TLS. And if we use it, we use another port, then standard port 80. So we easily see that it's something that is protected with SSL TLS. Otherwise, it's not really its own protocol, because it's just HTTP plus SSL TLS on a certain port. Okay, so, but that wasn't the question. The question was this HSTS, the high HTTP strict transport security. Anyone remember what that?
Some headers which server, for example, can put in HTTP, and a client read those headers, he knows, and he can only use HTTPS to communicate with the server.
Yeah, you're close here. Vad var det där nu då? We have a web server and we have a web browser. Normally, the client makes the first connection here. At this stage, the strict transport security protocol will kick in, and the server would give back here a policy, we can say. About HTTPS. So the server tells the client that whenever you communicate with me from now, this is how we should do it. And the policy could say that we should never have any communication without HTTPS. And we can also say that whenever we do it, we should never go below a certain level in encryption or whatever. So the server decides what is the minimum to communicate with me. Now, the client stores this information. And whenever we contact the server, we go back to our policy. Okay, the server says that I could never use anything less than that. If now we communicate back and forth here many times, and suddenly we have a man-in-the-middle attack here who tries to go between. The man-in-the-middle could never have a certificate. But well, they could, but that would be another type of attack. Typically, the man-in-the-middle doesn't have a certificate, which means, or the private key that we have up here. So the man-in-the-middle couldn't mimic the server fully. But what the man-in-the-middle normally does is trying to make the client connect to it without any security. So that's what the man-in-the-middle, it says, goes in here, the client tries to contact the server, but goes in and says that, okay, I'm here, but don't use any security this time. And now the policy says that, well, I shouldn't trust that. I should never communicate without that. So we won't start the communication with the man-in-the-middle here. So that's the idea with this protocol, to stop man-in-the-middle attacks that could occur later on. But it requires that we first had one secure communication at some time so we could get this policy. Okay, does that sound? Like something that could work? There is, of course, this weakness that we couldn't protect the first time we communicate. Unless we can distribute this policy beforehand somehow, which is possible, but it's not, we couldn't know that we can do it in all cases. Okay, then we have SSH, which stands for
Secure shell.
Yep, secure shell. What's the main service that secure shells gives us? Sorry? A terminal access, a simple terminal access where we can remote control another computer using written commands. So that's the basic service. And then around that service, SSH have developed a number of security services. And one of them is, of course, that we have to authenticate towards the other station. So, and they have 3 different ways to do that. And what are those 3 different options to authenticate? Yeah, a password, a simple password is one of them. It's not the best, but a certificate, yeah. And with a certificate, we really mean that we have a private key on our side. So the client have a private key, and what we give is our public key, our ID, and then we sign using our private key, and then it's up to the host to decide if that is appropriate or enough. So Okay, a private key and a password, these are the two first. And then we have one that is a little bit different. Yeah, host-based. And host-based is a little bit strange because what we are authenticating is not the user, but the computer that the user is on. So that's typically used in multi-user environments. If we have some type of Unix system with many users running, and then from that computer we connect to another computer, it's enough that the computer itself authenticates using his host-based key that we have. So, and then the client after that only gives his ID, its login. But the actual authentication is done by the host that the client is running on. That is also something that is not used that much today. We would like to authenticate the clients directly. But it is an option still. Okay, and then we have port forwarding. And as you see, this part is the one that gives most credit, full credit. So here you need to describe it a little bit more in detail to get full credits. So you will need to describe that there is we tunnel all the different services within just one tunnel. We have just one port that is needed to be open here. And then on the client side, the application sends its traffic to the local host. And in the local host, we have an SSH client running that encapsulates that, encrypts it, and sends it through this tunnel to the server side. On the server side again, we have SSH that is running. It decapsulates it, decrypts it, and forwards it to its local application. So the two applications doesn't know anything about it except that instead of sending to an IP on the other side, we send the information to the local host and a certain port that the SSH program is running on. So that's how, and we can have many applications in a client that is sending to this one, and everything is encrypted and then sent in this encrypted tunnel. So that's briefly port forwarding. Okay, any other questions around the transport layer? Okay, well, let's take a 10-minute break then, and I will get something so I can wipe the board as well.
kaffe, jatt.
Ja.
Kan jag snacka ljud där lite grann?
Det är inte det bästa.
Kanske något.
Precis.
Предпочли тебе, сначала просто
Ja.
Mot fan bryggeriet och det märks så.
Mm.
Det är fan skillnad alltså.
Så att det så måste bli surprise.
Okay, well, let's see. I got some questions online as well. We'll take first. So the first question is, what material are you allowed to bring to the exam? And the only material that you can bring is your is a dictionary. So in English, something dictionary that you may want to use. And the second question is about the assignments and if they can influence the exam. And yes, what you did on the assignment can also be a question on the exam, which I think we'll actually see on this one later on. No, maybe it was the other one. But I have a question about OpenSSL, for instance, which we didn't talk about in the lectures, but you have been working on it on the exams. So yes, things that you do on the exams can also be on the or on the exam, can be on the exam. Okay, so next question is about email security then. For email, there are many different things to consider. One recent standard in this area is DMARC, that in turn consists mainly of DKIM and SPF. So what is the main goal for DMARC, and previous also DKIM? So what is this about? What's the idea with DMARC and DKIM?
We encountered them in the assignments, actually.
Sorry?
We encountered these in the assignments.
Yeah, you did, but we also talked about them in the lectures.
I think SPF and DKIM, they're both for filtering email, mostly to avoid spam.
Yeah, you can use them to filter email, because you can base decision on what to do with an email based partly on these standards. But we have to expand it a little bit more on that.
Isn't DKIM used to verify that it comes from the right person?
Yeah. So that's the main thing actually with these standards, for the sender to be able to take some control over delivery of email. So what we do is already at the sender we sign the email in a little bit different ways. So it makes it possible to the receiver to actually see that this email came from a certain sender or not. And we use the DNS system to deliver this information about the keys that is needed to know who we are. So typically the sender signs an email using his private key. When it arrives on the other side, the receiver fetches the public key and information about the sender from the DNS. And then we can verify the signature using that public key, and then we can know it actually came from a certain sender or not, which means that we can detect things like spoofing. If we pretend we send from Microsoft.com, but we don't do it, this will be detected here because we couldn't sign it with Microsoft.com. So it can handle spoofing, it can handle help filtering out, as I said before, spam and phishing attacks and so on as well. So that's the general idea, for the sender to be able to have some control over delivery and for the receiver to validate that. And then the SPF addition here is more about a framework, a policy for how to do with the information. If we get an email and we detect that, okay, this is actually some fraudulent email, what should we do with this information? Should we forward it back to the domain that it pretends to come from, so that domain can protect itself, or should we just discard it, whatever? That is what this SPF standard can help us with. Some policy how to handle it. But as you see, it's 4 credits, so we need to describe it a little bit to get the full credit here. And then the second one is 6 credits, so that's even more. PGP and SMIME, Java standards and email security, what is the purpose, what is the difference? So obviously we have to write a little bit more here, a little bit more detailed. But in general, what is the purpose with both PGP and SMIME?
Encryption, authentication.
Yeah, I would bring it up to give us secure mail delivery by, and then we should go into a little bit on the details, because we get confidentiality by encryption, we get integrity by digital signing, and we get some type of authentication from the sender, also by digital signing, and possibly using certificates or this web of trust, so we know who actually was it who sent the email. So that is what both these gives us. They gives us a couple of different services around authentication, integrity, and confidentiality in the delivery of email from sender to receiver. And that's a purpose to give that. But what's the difference between them then? For? No, both handles any type of email with whatever type of attachments, whatever. So that's not the difference. As MIME is building on this MIME standard that makes it possible to have anything in it. But PGP can handle anything as well, so that's not the difference.
Is it about the way they handle the trust?
Yeah,
As
but
in one uses the web of trust and the other one uses certificate?
yeah, that's a fundamental difference, at least historically. That PGP didn't use certificates, didn't trust certificate authorities or that type. Instead, it was built on this web of trust where people should vouch for each other and build up trust in that way. While SMIME is built on certificates. That's how we actually do it. We need a certificate. So that's one difference. Today, both are using certificates. So today, that is not a difference anymore. Another difference is the intended use of them. PGP is intended to be, or at least, again, initially was intended to be used by private persons, while SMIME typically was intended to be used in a corporate environment. And SMIME requires a little bit more setup to work well, and that requires some type of server side and typically a business behind it. But it can work as a private person as well today. And PGP, of course, you can use it in a corporate environment, but it doesn't have any real support that you are in a corporate. Each installation is more or less separate.
So is that why we needed to download the email certificate from Commodore to be able to use SMIME?
Yeah, exactly. You need a certificate for that to work. You don't need that for PGP. Exactly. So those are the main differences. And then there are minor differences in exactly what type of encryption algorithms they support, exactly how they handle the email, I mean, PDP is having this process of compressing, encryption, adding authentication, segmentation. So the exact way to handle email is a little bit different, but those are minor things. They are typically doing almost the same things, even if I don't use exactly the same algorithms or algorithm, yeah, all the time. So the main thing is really the scope and the authentication. Okay, anything else about email security?
I wanted to get back to the DMARC because you mentioned
Right.
DKIM and SDF, but we skip the DMARC because it's not clear for me what is it.
Well, the difference between DKIM and DMARC is very little. I mean, as you see here, DMARC typically consists of these two. So DMARC is very little new. They combine these two and put it into a context. So DKIM is the domain keys in the message. So that's how we assign with the sender, and SPF is the policy on how to deal with it. And then you have just incorporate those two into DMARC.
Which is just the mix of DKIM and SPF.
Yeah, more or less. There's a little bit more, but not much more. Yeah. Right, and then we have Kerberos, authentication. The figure here shows the first simple model for how we log in using Kerberos. If you remember, we talked about 3 different steps. We start with a simple model, and then we see some weakness. We made it a little bit more complex, and then we found even more weaknesses, and then we had the full one. But this is the first simple step. And here we see that the client starts to send to the authentication server, sends its ID, who we are, our password, and what service we would like to use. And then in the second step, authentication server sends back a ticket to the client. If authentication server decides that yes, we are who we are and we are allowed to use the service, then we get a ticket. And as you see, the ticket is information about what service we're using, who we are, and it's encrypted. And then the client couldn't decipher this, but the client sends it to the server we're going to use, the mail server, for instance. So we tell who we are and we give us the ticket, and then the mail server can decrypt it because it shares this key between the authentication server and the server. So it can decrypt and check, yes, we do have the right to use this one. So these have some weaknesses here. So I mentioned 3 problems and how they're actually solved. So yeah, the first one, the plain text password. This message here is in plain text, which means that the password is also sent in plain text. So anyone who listens to the network can capture that, and then they can use our credentials and our password. So that's an obvious big mistake. And how is that solved in the final Kerberos?
The password just set in server, and client made its first request. The server get back it or packet encrypted with a key based on that password.
Yeah. So in the final version, we never send the password at all, actually. What we do instead, that we encrypt the traffic between the client and authentication server using this key, which has to be shared then previously between the authentication server and client. And as long as we can decrypt that information correctly, then of course we have the password. So that's the proof of that. So that's how it's solved. Okay, another problem.
we need to every time we need access to some service, we need to repeat the procedure every
Yep.
time.
Say that we want to use the print server next. In order to use the print server, we would have to authenticate against the access authentication server again. So we have to submit our password again to get a new ticket. And each time we want to use a new service, we have to authenticate again and again and again. So how is that solved then in the final protocol?
We add intermediate layer ticket granting system.
Yes, we add another layer here. We split up this authentication server in two parts, the authentication server itself and then a ticket granting server. And then we only need to authenticate once against the authentication server, and then we get a ticket saying that now we have authenticated. We don't have to do that again. And then we can use that ticket to access the ticket granting server each time we would like to access a new service. And we get a specific ticket for each service later on. So we have removed that need of authenticating for each service. Okay, so that's two things. One more thing. Well, one more thing that we can point at here is the lifetime for tickets. Because right now we get a ticket and there's nothing to say for how long that ticket is valid. Which means that if we get a ticket, we can use it forever. And that's not a good solution. So we should put in a lifetime for tickets. So limited lifetime, which means that we have to put in timestamps and for how long they should be valid, which could be different for different types of services, for instance. So that is what we also add. So these are three things. There are other things, but they are not that obvious and easy to describe, so that's why I choose three here, because those three are the simplest one to bring up here. So we have 3 steps here in this simple. How many steps are there in the full Kerberos model? Yeah, there are 6 steps. 1 and 2 is between the client and the authentication server. 3 and 4 is between the client and the ticket granting server to request and get a ticket. And then the last 2 is against the specific server we want to use. We authenticate, but we also get a signal back. So the server also authenticates, so we know we are accessing the correct server. So 6 messages. Okay, Kerberos is building its authentication model on symmetrical encryption and passwords. We don't have any public key encryption here at all in Kerberos. But an alternative to Kerberos is then to use public key certificates. Describe briefly how that works then. So, well, the idea to authenticate using public keys is first, of course, based on a key pair. We create a key pair, public-private key. We distribute the public key and we keep our private key private. And then when we send something, we sign that message using our private key. And on the other side, the recipient can now decrypt that message or verify the signature using our public key. But there is one element missing here, an important element, to get this secure. A certificate, exactly. We need to bind that private public key to a person, a user or a server. So we need a certificate to make that binding, and that's essential to get this to work. So it's not enough to just have the keys, we also need to have a certificate. And then, of course, we need to validate certificate, make sure that it's still valid, it hasn't been revoked and so on. So we have all of that processing to do as well. Okay, short one. What's the difference between identification and then there's actually an error here. Because you see in the Swedish question it says authentication, but here we say authorization, which is possible to answer as well, but it should be authentication. So if we just start with this then, since we have it here, what is authorization?
If you're allowed to do something.
Yeah, what you're allowed to do. You're allowed to send out email, for instance, then you're authorized to do that. So it's a limitation of what you can do in the system. So it's not directly valid here in this question. So let's talk about identification and authentication instead then. What's the difference between identification and authentication?
When we identify who the customer,
And how do we do that?
certificate.
A certificate? No. I mean, when you identify yourself to a system, what are you using to identify yourself?
User ID.
Yeah, typically your username. That is how you identify yourself. You're saying, I am this person, I am this user. That's identification. In the context of, if we talk about a login context. We can also talk about identification, authentication actually in another situation. We can say that you have a surveillance camera pointing to a square, looking at all the thousands of people who are going there. In that case, identification is trying to identify who a person is by looking at all of these. So in that sense, identification is that from a large sum of objects, identify which one is the one we are looking for. While authentication is, now we have one object. Now we would like to prove that that is actually the object that we are looking at. So, and a typical, if we go back to the login situation, then of course you have to prove that you are who you are. And then you can use a certificate to prove who you are. So certificate is connected to the authentication. Or more simply, we can use a password, for instance, to prove that we are who we are.
So could you connect this to a key pair if you send your public key and saying, I am this person, this is my public key, and then you authenticate by sending a message with your private key?
Yeah, you sign something with your private key and send it, and that would be the proof that you are actually that one. Yeah, you can see it that way. So identification is only pointing out, okay, this is supposed to be that object or that person. And authentication is proving that somehow. Okay, internet payments and the standard 3D Secure. Give an overview how 3D Secure works. First, who is behind 3D Secure? Who have developed that standard? Well, it's a credit card industry, so the major credit card companies is behind that one. And what is the purpose of it? Yeah.
Secure payment.
Yeah, secure credit card payments specifically. So whenever you want to buy something on the internet using a credit card, 3D Secure is there to try to make it secure. And then the question is secure in what aspect? Because I mean secure can be many things. It can be, I said, authentication, it can be confidentiality, it can be, so what type of security does 3D Secure give us in this credit card payment?
You make security by knowing only you can pay with your credit card by
Yeah.
identifying yourself.
Yeah, it tries to link the card more closely to a person by requiring extra authentication when you use your credit card. Because normally, or before this, credit card payment meant that you just sent your credit card information to a web server or to the shop, and then they could use that information to extract money from it. But with 3D Secure, you're doing the same thing. You send your information, and then the system will say, okay, this card is protected by 3D Secure, which means that now we have to be redirected back to the credit card company and authenticate this purchase. So we authenticate back to our credit card company. Some way, it can be using bank ID or a password or a biometric method. It depends on how we set it up. But once we have authenticated, but not against the web shop, but against our credit card company again, we get a token. And then we submit that token to web shop, who then, with that token, they can now extract money from our credit card. So it's a way to increase the security on users of credit card on the internet. So that's an overview. That would be.
It's always a two-step verification, right?
Um,
You have to verify. I mean, you don't have to verify. Right?
Normally you don't verify at all, you just give your information. But now you add a layer of authentication, I would say. Okay, second question about mobile payments, like Apple Pay or Samsung Pay. How does that work in general and how secure is it? Well, anyone would like to have a go?
Is it the same as the? Should we think of it the same as on the card? Just believe it.
Well, yeah, it's exactly, it simulates how to use an NFC card where you just point it. So, but they do it a little bit differently actually, because the Apple Pay system works exactly like that. It mimics an NFC card with this remote communication or near field communication, as it says. So it looks like a credit card to the machine. Samsung Pay actually also imitates the magnetic stripe of a card. So even if in those terminals that need a magnetic stripe instead, the Samsung phone looks like a credit card in that. So in general what they do is they imitate a card by encrypting information about a credit card and encapsulating them into a mobile phone. And then you use your mobile phone as your card instead. But the essential part of it is that it's not the full information that is available in your phone. You have the information of your credit card is encrypted and stored in a secure, well, we call it different, but think about it as a secure vault. It's a specific chip actually on the mobile phone that keeps this information, and it's never stored in a full text information, so it's only encrypted information. So even if you lose your phone and someone could break into it, they couldn't extract that information. Then whenever you use it, you have to authenticate. in some, and it depends on what phone you have. You can use, can be that you have to give a password, or it can be some biometric method, but you have to authenticate each time you use your card.
Never always.
No, true. So you could, for a card, say that if you buy something but below, say, 500 krona or 100 krona, you don't have to authenticate, and you can use that for a number of times before you have to authenticate again. But there is always limitation for it.
You can't buy anything over 200 crowns using Apple Pay or Samsung Pay or the NFC on the card.
But it depends on the bank, it depends on the card, and I think it may also be your own
It's
settings.
Usually I know for at least the banks here, you can pay up to 5 times a day using NFC,
Yeah,
and then you have to enter your PIN,
yeah,
so you won't get scammed. if
Yeah.
somebody finds the card.
but as I said, that it's different for different cards, and so, but typically you have that option at least. Also, if we talk about how secure it is, well, there are different aspects of that, of course. One aspect is how secure is the credit card information, and as far as known, it is secure. There has been no known vulnerabilities or known attacks against that information that is stored on a mobile phone to extract that. So that seems to be secure as far as we know, at least. Another aspect of security is privacy. I mean, when we use a credit card, of course the credit card company knows what we are using it for, because they would need to send money to the one that we are using it for, so they can follow all our transactions. The question is, could Apple and Samsung also see our transactions? And potentially they could, because I mean they have a device, they have implemented a service, so they could easily follow all the transactions as well if they wanted to. But they claim, and again no one have been able to prove them otherwise, that they don't store any information, but they don't get that information about how you use your credit card. The only thing they get is they get some percentage of each use of it. So they get the revenue from it, from a credit card company. But they don't see how you use it more than that. So that is also a security aspect that you should bring up here, actually. Okay, and then we have Bitcoins and the blockchain technology. Now, blockchain is the technology that can be used for different things. Cryptocurrency is just one of the things. You can use it for what's called smart contracts and other things as well. But specifically, what is this blockchain technology used for in Bitcoin?
To keep track of all the transactions.
Yeah, to keep track of transactions. What we have what's called a ledger that keeps track of all transactions, and that is handled by this blockchain to record each use of a Bitcoin and who is currently, well, not who is currently, but how we can use it in the next step, what private key needs to be used in order to use that Bitcoin the next time. So keeping track of that ledger, and that ledger is a distributed database, we can say. So we have thousands or tens of thousands of computers around the world that keeps this ledger and to sync them all the time. And that is part of the problem actually with Bitcoin, because we need to keep that synced, which means that whenever we use a Bitcoin, it takes a little time each time we use it, because we need to be recorded and then it has to be synced out. So it is a bit slow. But at least one time in history, it has been known that this ledger had been split in two parts. So the distributed database actually started to to not be synced, but they could handle it that time. But that's what blockchain is used for, and that was an only question here really. So we covered that. And then the last question is about firewalls then. First one is we have some firewall rules. Describe what traffic that will be allowed to pass and what will be denied, and what happens with traffic that the other side should be denied. So let's start with that one. If a firewall decides that something should be denied, what happens with it?
Drops the packet.
Yeah, it just dropped. The firewall gets it on the input interface, puts it in the buffer, investigates it, and if it decides it shouldn't be allowed, we just drop it, we discard it. And that's it. If we allow it, we forward it on one of the output interfaces. So that's the simple part. Now, if we look at the rules here, what is going on here? If you look at the rules, could you say what will this firewall allow? And what will it deny? Well, we should always go to the last rule first, really. And what does the last rule says?
Deny everything.
Yeah,
Except.
exactly. Deny everything except if something is triggered before. So the base rule is that we deny everything. So the only thing that will be allowed is something that is up here, possibly. If we start to look at the first two rules, they look very similar. But what is the difference between the first two rules?
Source and destination are. And deny and allow.
Yeah? So the first rule says actually to deny something. And if this triggers, then we discard the packet, and then that's it. If we don't discard it here, then we continue. So can you try to describe why do we have these two rules?
That's to, the first one is to deny any, I guess it's incoming if we're the source address, or deny any incoming TCP connections using HTTP to the destination address.
Well, it's not incoming because we say that the destination is outside our network.
Okay, so that's all right.
So we are looking at traffic going out. And they are going to what? What type of service? Yeah. So it's traffic from a web browser on the inside going to public web service. That's what these both rules are about. So this part here is the difference then. What is this saying? What is denied and what is allowed?
I would assume that we will deny a specific web server or a specific computer with a specific IP to send information to the public. Protect a certain computer with that IP.
Is it a certain computer? Yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's a subnet. We're saying that any computer in this subnet, 222.222.1, so a class C net, that network will be denied. So actually what we're saying is that we have an internal network here. This is the internet, and this network is this 222.22/16. But part of that network is the smaller one, which is 222.1.24. So it's a smaller part of our internal network. And what we're saying is that if someone from this part here tries to go out, it will be denied. So actually what we're saying is that no, you are not allowed to go out on the internet. But the rest of the network is allowed to do it. I mean, this could be some internal system that we don't want to have any malware into. So they're not even allowed to contact out. But the rest is normal office computer, whatever, so they can do it. So that's why we have these two rules here. We limit that part of our network will not be allowed. The next two, what are they doing? Well, let's say first this one perhaps. We should mention this one, the third rule.
So it's back packets.
Yeah, the return traffic. If we contact somewhere, here we have a public web server. We contact it, we get it through with this rule here, and now, of course, we have to send something back here. And for that to be allowed to get back, we need this rule to allow the response traffic. So, and here we don't limit it, because if we can't contact here, we don't need a rule to filter out the return traffic either. So we allow actually the entire network here. But then we have these two rules about port 53 and UDP. One is going from inside to the outside, and the other one is going from the outside to the inside. What's going on port 53 using UDP? Yes, DNS. So what we're doing here is let's say that, okay, before we actually go to a web server, we probably put in a domain name, and we are allowed to use the DNS system to resolve that into an IP address and get the result back here. And then everything else is blocked. So the only thing that we allow is DNS and HTTP traffic from this network except this internal one, and everything else will be denied, all other services or whatever. Does it seem to be making sense? Okay, so that's the first one. Didn't we? No, we didn't. Okay. Just that the table was below here. So, firewall testing. When you make firewall, you need different tools. Shortly describe what the following types are used for in this context. Okay, so a network traffic generator. What is a network traffic generator doing? Yeah, exactly. It generates network traffic. But the idea is that it can create large amounts of different types of traffic. It can mimic, for instance, web server or whatever, and sends a lot of traffic of certain types. So we can configure network generator traffic to generate, and it can generate large amount of different traffic and then intermingle it with something else. So it's the idea is that we should be able to test something that is looking like a real situation, but we don't need to have real systems to generate it.
Could we generate DDoS traffic?
Yes, we can do that as well. Well, it depends on there are different, but often we can generate different type of attack patterns as well. But that is maybe even more probably in this third vulnerability detection tool, because here we are generating different types of attack patterns and testing different types of vulnerabilities. So we can do SQL injection attacks, cross-script section attacks. We can do denial of service attacks and so on. We generate different types of attack patterns to test the vulnerability of both the firewall itself, but also the systems behind the firewall. And the firewall should be, of course, itself resilient to them, but maybe also filter out most of them so they don't reach the system behind the firewall. So that's the vulnerability detection tool. And the network monitor, what is that? Example application. Yeah, Wireshark is a network monitor. What we're doing is we want to actually see what is going on the network, not what we assume by looking at logs or whatever, but we would actually see on the network what's going on. So take in the traffic and do different type of analysis on it. And then a port scanner.
Checks which ports are open.
Yep. And how does it do it? How does it check if ports open?
It tests something.
Yeah. It's typically you fire up a port scanner and say that, okay, I want to test this subsystem, for instance, this network, and a certain range of ports. And then it goes through all the different IP addresses in that network, all the different ports, tries to send traffic to it to see if it gets response. It can be more or less advanced. They can just do a very simple connection to it to see if the other side responds to that connection attempt. Or it can actually try to mimic the different services that the ports are using to be more, to look more real and see if a port accepts it that time. Because sometimes you can configure services to not respond unless they see something that is an actual connection attempt, not only a simple setting up a port. But yeah, typically to see what is open, what is open for business in different parts of the network. Right. So now we handle that one as well, which means that the time is over. But we handle one exam in 2 hours at least, so that's not too bad. You have 5.
Do you actually need all 5 hours?
No, I don't think so. Well, there is always some students who use all the time, but I would say that 3 hours is probably what you need. No, no, you shouldn't.
Is there going to be any example solutions for the exams?
No, but after they are correct and you get the grade, you can come and fetch them in my office, and then we can discuss them if there are
I was
things.
thinking for the exam, the practice exam.
No, I don't have them, unfortunately. It takes too long time to write them. So no. So if you have any questions about any other exams now until Tuesday, post them on Slack, and then either someone else can help answer it or I'll try to answer them. Right. Good luck.